Hey folks, welcome into the News 12 Now desk. Thanks for joining us. Just about 11:15 here on our Thursday. Hopefully you are having a great day. We're going to take a bit of a deeper dive right now into one of our biggest stories we've been telling you about. It's been developing over time, and then we had a big story on it last night. We're talking about violence in Richmond County, specifically among the youth. So what we're going to do is we've got a story that Will Rio did last night. I'll go ahead and play that. On the other side of that, we'll bring Will up here to the News 12 Now desk. We'll talk a little bit about it, and then we actually have the full 20-minute interview with Sheriff Richard Roundtree that we're going to go ahead and play at the end of that. So right now, we'll get into Will's story, asking the sheriff about efforts to prevent crimes and where the cases involving two specific teens, Buddy Brown and Zaire Person, stand today. So again, we'll play that story. Will be up here. We'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll play the full interview from Sheriff Richard Roundtree.
Yeah, right now the sheriff tells me that they're still working on both of those cases, but it's leaving the community with so many questions. Where do we go from here? How do we solve this problem? This is what the sheriff had to say about the current state of gun violence in Augusta. For the last 10 years, Sheriff Roundtree says shootings and homicides have consistently made the headlines, including last year when we saw one of the highest number of homicides and shootings in the last 8 years.
Gun violence have been our albatross here in Richmond County. We try to throw every resource we can at it. Unfortunately, as the time has progressed, the victims and the perpetrators are becoming younger and younger, and that's what's just disheartening.
It's a problem the sheriff says is happening all too often, including almost weekly in Augusta.
We are losing these lives and losing these generations right here in Augusta, and I don't think people see that picture. We see it in law enforcement, but people see it as a headline, and then they move on. I don't think they're taking it serious enough that this is a community problem.
Sheriff Roundtree says there are 3 parts that need to go towards solving this issue: responsible gun ownership and gun safety so those guns aren't stolen, more resources, mentorships, and funding for the youth, and responsibility from the parents in this community. Sheriff Roundtree says so often these kids aren't being looked after, and parents aren't aware kids are bringing guns into their homes.
The parents and the loved ones outraged after a shooting happened. There was no outrage when they were coming in at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, or leaving for 3 or 4 days, or hanging with a group that you know are guys who are in nefarious habits or selling drugs or in gangs. And you knew this was happening and you're not intervening. And that's why I say it's a societal problem. It's not just a law enforcement.
What can parents tell their kids? How can parents talk to their children about this?
Parents need to understand everything that those kids are bringing into their home. And it's about just being a parent, being a responsible parent. And that's why I say when these shootings happen and kids takes another kid's life, you know, some of that responsibility, and you've seen they prosecuted in other cases, falls on the parent for allowing that gun to be possessed illegally by that juvenile. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on that. We don't put enough light on that. Again, we get outraged too much at the wrong things.
Sheriff Roundtree tells me his community policing efforts have been working and still are. He says violent crimes are down in Richmond County, which according to data we have, they are, except for homicides and shootings.
And we're losing a generation of young people. And I don't think we as a society, especially here in Richmond County, are looking at it that way.
Now, Sheriff Roundtree says moving forward, a big part of crime reduction is going to be technology. He says they're working on their downtown camera project, and they hope to expand that throughout the entire community moving forward.
So there you go. There was the story that Will did yesterday, and we're joined now by Will Rio to talk a little bit more about this. So, Will, before we get into exactly what the sheriff was talking about earlier, I wanted to give a little bit of background on these 2 specific cases that we're talking about. We've got Buddy Brown, the 13-year-old, and then Zaire Person, the 15-year-old, who were both killed within about a week of each other. Let's start with Buddy. What do we know about that case? Just kind of bring people up to speed if they're not familiar.
That's the thing. We don't know a lot about either of these cases, unfortunately, and they're still developing. As you heard at the end of that story that I did last night, we talked with Sheriff Roundtree trying to get some sort of information out of him of where these cases stand right now. I have some information that I can't release right now because of the ongoing investigation, but they say that they are diligently working on that, as they are with other homicide cases here in Richmond County, and there will be progress made. We're hoping very soon on that. But for 13-year-old Buddy Brown, what we know right now, sat down with his family a few weeks ago before Masters Week, simply was going down to get his DoorDash order from McDonald's at around 12:31 a.m. and then next thing we know, we got a hold of the 911 call. They said a young boy was laying on the ground outside who had been shot. We don't know who that is. We don't know what happened. We just know that he ordered DoorDash from McDonald's. That driver showed up, went out to get his food, and then he ended up getting shot. So his parents telling me it seemed like he was facing away from the shooter at the time that that had happened. So maybe trying to get back into the building. We're still just not sure. And then for 15-year-old Zaire Person, just sat down with his family just 2 days ago, them sharing some details. Right now, they believe that he was shot by multiple shooters, and he also was not the intended target in that shooting that happened at a party, a splat party with toy guns on at a house on Old McDuffie Road. A splat party, for anyone who doesn't know, they're toy guns that have almost like water beads in them, and it's actually been a controversial toy.
I hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah, so it's a fake gun where they just use water beads to shoot each other, but he ended up getting shot and then later died at the hospital. His family still has no answers as to what happened. He was a straight-A student. He was on the JV and varsity football team at Butler High School, I believe it was. Aspiring to do great things, and unfortunately his parents said, or his grandmother said, wrong place, wrong time. He was supposed to be in South Korea on spring break going to visit one of his family members that was in the military. His passport didn't come back in time, so he stayed behind and unfortunately ended up getting shot and killed by some bad actors there at that party.
And his family believed he wasn't the target.
Correct. He was not the intended target from what his family has said. Maybe there were some issues with some rivalry neighborhoods that we talk about, maybe some gang violence. We're just not sure what exactly happened. Still waiting for answers from the sheriff's office in these cases.
Yeah, and so we've been tracking data now for about a year when it comes to these homicides around the area, and we had, I think it was 44 in the last year, and
from our data, yeah,
from our
44,
data, right.
yeah, that we've been able to collect, yeah,
give or take. And of those 44, I think the number that sticks out the most was, I don't remember the exact 17.
So 18 or younger, we had 6 young people that were killed by gun violence, and then 25 and younger, we had 17 out of 44. So a large number of young people being wrapped up in this violence here in the CSRA. It's just, those are raw numbers. It's something we look at, and it's hard to believe that people, our age and even younger, you got 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and then 18, 19-year-olds who are being wrapped up and killed by gun violence. And not to mention, we have the victims here, and one thing that sticks out, you have the people who are doing the shootings who are also the same age or younger. So when you have one person killed to this gun violence, you have 1-2 shooters who are the same age, if not younger, who are also going to go to jail. So you have not one life gone, but you have 3-4 lives gone that point.
Look at Alabama, the recent shooting they had. Those were all
16 and a 19-year-old, yeah, or 17-year-old.
And we're seeing it here too. And one thing I wanted to get to as well is we talked about, we're seeing kind of 2 trends here. So we have violent crimes, as you mentioned in the story there. Violent crimes seem to be on the way down, but homicides, and those seem to be going up in recent years. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, so violent crimes in general, holistically, the sheriff said that those are going down. We collected that data last year. That does corroborate with what he was saying. We got burglaries, rapes, thefts, things like of that nature are going down. They have been going down since Roundtree took office here, but then you take a look at the homicides, they're kind of up and down, but they're more on the upswing as of recently. Last year we had one of our highest homicide rates in the last 8 years. We're also trending that way for this year. Aggravated assaults with a gun, which are also known as shootings, have also been on the rise in the last couple of years, over the last 10 years really. Sheriff Roundtree alluded to that yesterday. He said, I've been doing this for 30 years. Kids keep getting younger, and over the last 10 years, it's been getting worse, and the kids are just getting younger. So it's disheartening, is what he said. It's how he described it. You hate to see it, and they're trying to do everything that they can to combat this, but you know, he says it's not a law enforcement problem, it's a societal problem. It's something the community needs to step up and do, and in some ways you have to agree with him. You know, law enforcement can't be everywhere all at one time. There's got to be some responsibility on the community and law enforcement to come together to try to prevent things like this.
And so what was, I guess, and you know, you'll hear all this information again when we play the full interview, which we'll do in just a little bit, but I just want to hit on like a few key points before we do that. I know one of the questions you had asked was like, what can parents tell their kids? Like, what's the message to parents to get to their kids before something bad happens? Because a lot of the times, like he says, they don't even know what's being brought into the home. If they're bringing guns into the home, if they're bringing drugs into the home, the parents don't even know. So what is the message for parents?
You know, I'm not a parent. I don't have kids, so I don't know what that responsibility is like. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I know how easy it is to take care of a child and do all of that. But, you know, the biggest thing is for parents to be present, is what he said. Like you said, know what children are bringing into the house. A lot of these parents don't know that these kids are bringing guns into their houses and then going out onto the streets and then partaking in this violence. So that's the biggest thing. He really harped on parents being responsible, being present, being there. You know, he says a lot of these parents don't have a problem when their kids are out till 3, 4 in the morning, or they're gone for 3 or 4 days in a row, and then you don't question them or do anything. And then, you know, when there's a murder in the streets of Augusta, then everyone wants to be outraged at it. He says people just get outraged at the wrong things all the time, is what he was saying. And one thing that actually really stuck out to me that I feel like we didn't touch on as much is that, you know, we see a lot of these mass shootings happen, or shootings in general, and these kids get guns. And now the parents are being held accountable for allowing their kids to have these guns, and they're being punished and they're being prosecuted for that. He says that doesn't get enough light, which I thought was pretty surprising, and almost like a shift that we're seeing, is that he wants parents to be held more accountable and be more responsible for their children here.
Yeah, and I know one of the shootings, I can't remember exactly which one it was. If there was one in Michigan, maybe
that was the
Michigan one.
That was the
that's
one.
Where the one where the parents are also being charged for, I guess, having the gun or giving him the gun or
allowing him to have it,
whatever it was,
access.
And so it's crazy to think too. You said these kids are getting younger and younger. I remember when the Samantha Josephson thing happened in South Carolina.
Absolutely.
And she was killed. And I think Nathaniel Rowland was his name. I think he was 25 at the time. And there were people talking about, oh, maybe it was gang related, you know, initiation to a gang. And they said, you know, 25 is too old for that, to be getting into a gang.
Yeah.
You think about, you know, 25, a lot of people, 25-year-olds just getting into a career. But in a life of crime, you know, that's
way too
well
late.
beyond your early years. And so to think about 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds getting killed and being in this.
And the craziest part about all of that is that a few months ago, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but because we do so many crime stories, it feels like, so it all gets washed out. We sat down with the Richmond County Gang Task Force. I believe they're with the DA's office. I may be wrong about that, but one thing that stuck out, and we've said this multiple times, is that these kids are being recruited to go into gangs in elementary school. Early elementary school is where these kids are being targeted. That's crazy to even think about, that something like that is happening, and that's normal now. I mean, they're getting groomed to grow up and to partake in those activities. So getting them at such an early age, you know, when you get them at, I was talking to Zaire Person's family, and they were like, you know, when you get to them at 17, 18, 19, it's way too late. It's way too late to intervene and to do anything. So getting them at such a young age is huge.
Yeah, and it's, you know, those kids are so impressionable at that age, and it goes back to what Richard Roundtree was saying, like, if you're not present, you know, and aware of what the kids are doing at all times, and somebody else is, then the loyalty for those kids kind of shifts, and it could be
you have
people that are going to take them down the wrong path.
You have gang members or gangs that are coming in and saying, hey, we'll take care of you. We'll take care of your family. I mean, that's what they've told me, the gang task force. They're like, these gangs and these gang members are showing these young kids that someone does love them, even if your parents don't, or if they're not present there. And they will come by and they will support the families, and they will support them and get them to where they need to be. And that is a loyalty thing that happens. So it's huge circle.
Yeah, and what were they saying? And again, I know you can't talk about everything, and maybe this isn't a question that you're able to answer or that you can answer right now. With these two specific kids, we're hearing from a 13-year-old who was out getting DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever it was at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were talking about a kid who was just at a party that wasn't even supposed to be there originally. Have they are they investigating these as gang related, or is that something we can't get into?
I'm not sure.
They didn't say?
I'm not sure. That was one of the questions that I asked Buddy Brown's family. I asked if, you hear that they started at such a young age. I asked if he was involved in anything like that at school that they were aware of. They said no, absolutely not. He wasn't running the streets, doing things like that. So from the information that we have, it seems like it's completely random. The family doesn't know if anyone would be out to hurt them or their son. So that case, I have no idea. Zaire Person seems like a straight shooter, A+ kid, loved the books, loved his video games, loved playing sports, seemed like wrong place, wrong time. Sheriff's office says unfortunate situation.
It's tough. I mean, you can't even imagine the spot that these families go through, and it almost hurts more when you think like they were truly just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean,
yeah,
ordering food, being out with friends when you weren't even supposed to be in the country at this point, and so it's tough
happening
to
it's happening all too often, and that's what the sheriff's office says. It's happening almost weekly if you look at the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a couple parts. Another thing I wanted to touch on is that Sheriff Roundtree says there's a couple parts that need to go towards at least addressing and solving the problem. That'd be responsible gun ownership and gun safety. A lot of guns here in Richmond County that are used in these crimes are stolen weapons. So when you have them in your cars, it's so easy for people to break in and just steal those guns. And then he's like, we have people who have them in their houses and shoe boxes and stuff not put up properly. So a big thing are stolen weapons in the county that these kids and these young people have access to so easily. Another thing, more resources, mentorship, funding for the youth. Obviously, we've been talking about that for so long. Getting the youth involved, mentorship programs. Zaire Person was involved in a lot of those mentorship programs from a young age, which makes his situation even more unfortunate there. And then obviously responsibility from parents in the community.
Yeah, and we did hear from a number of Zaire Person's mentors.
Three. We've heard from 3 of them saying that he was all involved, and he was a great kid, almost like he was running away from that life, and it still found him and showed up at his doorstep.
Yeah, and there are these programs out there, and I almost feel like, and this is just me kind of outside looking in, it almost feels like everybody's trying to say, like, okay, you need to be more involved. Or, parents are saying sheriff's office needs to be more involved and the schools need to be more involved. And in turn, they're saying the parents need to be more involved. It almost feels like everybody is kind of saying, like, everybody else needs to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that's making it hard, too.
Yeah. I mean, it's been something where it's almost felt like we've been pointing fingers for at least the 2.5 years that I've been here now. We've tried to search for answers and what is the secret sauce in trying to figure out this problem. I mean, it starts at home. Parents obviously are with their children at homes. They go to school. COVID really had a big impact on a lot of kids and students in our area because, they didn't have that safe place. Schools were shut down a lot of times. So that took a big impact on what they're seeing. Roundtree said the same thing when I talked to him, and then you have those after-school programs that do the wraparound services. So it's a multi-tier solution. Everyone has to pitch in to try to solve this issue. And it's really, everyone just has to step up and say, enough is enough. We're not going to let our kids keep dying to gun violence.
And it almost becomes like Sheriff Roundtree said, it's making headlines every week, and we see it, we get upset about it, and then we kind of move on. And it's almost like we've become just so used to it and just so desensitized to it that it's just like, happened again. But then when you sit down and you've done a lot of this over the years, and you sit down and you talk to these families and you listen to their stories and you hear the pain in their voices, it makes it so much more real and it makes it so much harder. And I think that's why it's important too to try to bring these stories to light, is because at the end of the day, these are kids dying.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a 13-year-old kid dying, and to think about taking myself back to 13, or you taking yourself back to 13, and all the things you've done since, all that you would have missed out on had you become a statistic. Yeah, it puts it in perspective, and it makes it real hard.
It's really important for us to sit down and share these stories with the community and show you guys who these kids are, because they're not just statistics. They're not just numbers that we request from the sheriff's office. These are real kids, real families that are impacted. I mean, we hate having to message families and say, hey, like, we'd love to share your son's story or who he was with the community. We don't want to do that. Like, we don't want to do that at all. It is really hard for us to sit down all the time. It's hard for the sheriff's office to sit down all the time, have these conversations over and over and over again. It feels like it's just a rotating circle that, I mean, we sit down in our meetings every morning and it's like, how do we go about addressing this one? How do we make this different? They're not different. It's all the same story, you know, and it seems like it's getting worse quicker than it's getting better.
Yeah, I mean, and the numbers are reflecting that.
Yeah.
You look at, was it 6 kids, 18 years and younger?
Over the last year, and just
then
1 year.
17, 25 and younger.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane. That is, I mean, 17 people our age and younger have died in the last year because of gun violence in Richmond County.
Yeah, just Richmond County. I mean, that's not, I mean, we just had another shooting last night, but we've had 90 in the entire CSRA. So everywhere that we cover in all of our counties, 90 people have died to gun violence or a suspicious death in some way.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, there's only a few that were stabbed, and then the rest, majority, I would say 90% or more, were shootings.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe number. And I want to kind of go back to not necessarily finger pointing, but talking about everybody kind of stepping up together. And I think, you know, we've talked about parents getting involved a lot. And I think about it, and it is hard because you think of the single parent that works, 8 to 6, and the kids get off school at 2:30, 3 o'clock, and they've got nothing to do. And that's where those after-school programs are so important. And so I think kind of as a whole, as a community, it's not so much what can you do better to help my kid or what can you do better to help your kid. What can we do better to help all the kids? I think that's kind of the message moving forward, and I think that's what Sheriff Roundtree was talking about a little bit in that interview yesterday too.
Yeah, I think it's just a sense of accountability. I think that people have to start looking in the mirror and going, what? Because the sheriff's office they're not babysitters. You know, they're not going to show up on people's doorsteps and they can't prevent homicides. That's the one thing they told me. You can't guess when someone's going to shoot and kill someone else, and it's one of the hardest crimes to try to prevent because you just don't know when it's going to happen. You know, we're losing an entire generation, is what Roundtree says. And he says, I don't think Richmond County even wants to have that conversation or even acknowledge that that's happening. So, yeah, I think it's more of just stop the finger pointing and look back at what you're doing at home and what the schools are doing, what the other programs are doing. So there's a lot to this. It's not just one person's problem. And I feel like that's what's going on, is that people are pointing fingers saying, you need to do more.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, you need to do more.
Yeah, and that's kind of getting us in the same situation that we've been in now for, like you said, you've been here 2.5, almost 3 years. I've been here 3.5, almost 4, and it's been the same story since we've been here. But Will, we appreciate the insight here. We're actually going to go ahead and play the full interview from Sheriff Roundtree now. It runs for about 25 minutes, so if you want to stick around and listen to some of that, we'll go ahead and run you through that now.
So I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of the gun violence that we've been seeing in Richmond County. I know we've had a couple young people that have fallen victim to that. Just what are your initial thoughts on seeing that a 13 and a 15-year-old had fallen victim to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for the last 10 years, gun violence have been our albatross here in Richmond County. We try to throw every resource we can at it. Unfortunately, as the time has progressed, the victims and the perpetrators are becoming younger and younger, and that's what's disheartening. You know, when I started this business 30 years ago, you know, gun violence was prevalent, but now it's to the point now where, you know, you almost get the death of a 13-year-old, and it shouldn't be that way.
I know that I've talked to Chief Clayton many times, just interviewing him. You don't speak publicly a lot unless it's super important. You told me before we started that something like this was really important. Is that, you feel the same? Like you're talking about, you decided to come do this interview because this topic?
Absolutely. I think the public, I don't think we get outraged enough about the right things. This is a problem in our community, especially our minority community, our African American community. This is an epidemic and does not get the right amount of attention and amount of resources that I think people don't realize what is happening, that these young kids are shooting each other and now ultimately killing each other as a weekly occurrence. And we're losing these lives and losing these generations right here in Augusta. And I don't think people see that picture. We see it in law enforcement, but people see it as a headline, and then they move on. I don't think they're taking it serious enough that this is a community problem. This is not a law enforcement problem. This is a societal problem, and we got to be throwing more resources at it than just incarcerating people. You know, in my jail now, I got 1,100 inmates in my jail. 1,000 of them are for felonies. 100 of them are for homicide. That's the reality that's in Richmond County, and I don't think that message is being broadcast enough within the community ranks. Like I said, I think we get outraged at the wrong things too often and not seeing this epidemic that is happening right in our own community.
So if you feel like it's not being broadcasted properly to the community, what needs to change, do you think?
No, I think we're reporting it. I don't think it's being received as the epidemic that it is in the community. You know, we look for these causes to get outraged and get upset, and we get upset with law enforcement, get upset, you know, with officials and things of that nature. But I don't think within our community we're not seeing, again, we're losing a generation of young people. And I don't think we as a society, especially here in Richmond County, are looking at it that way. You know, I look at it, and like I said, it is a generation. When I worked homicide, usually my homicide suspects, my homicide victims was between 18 and 25, which I thought was tragic at that time because I said, you know, they were young kids. Now, you know, I'm much older now. But now, like I said, the 13 and 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds are not just the victims, they're the perpetrators too. And that's scary.
What kind of resources can we throw at this issue? I know you just talked about that, so you said we need to throw more at it. What are some ideas for that? Yeah,
one thing, again, you know, we need to be, in our society, need to be more conscientious about our gun safety protocols, where if we are responsible enough to carry firearms or own firearms, we need to be responsible enough to keep those firearms safe so they won't get out into the street. Because, you know, the reality of it is, Will, that these individuals who are perpetrating these homicides and these shootings are not going to the store and buying these guns legally. They're stealing them. And they're stealing them from unsecured vehicles or homes where people just keep them laying around in shoe boxes and stuff of that nature. So one is responsible gun ownership. The other part of it is we as a society, we're not giving any resources to our young kids where they're in the streets. You know, you get the parents and the loved ones outraged after a shooting happened, or their 13, 14, or 15-year-old is murdered in the streets of Augusta. But there was no outrage when they were coming in at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning or leaving for 3 or 4 days or hanging with a group that you know are guys who are in nefarious habits or selling drugs or in gangs. And you knew this was happening and you're not intervening. And that's why I say it's a societal problem. It's not just a law enforcement. We're going to do our part, and we're doing it. Like I said, I got 1,100 souls locked up at Charles B. Webster Center that attest to the fact that we are locking individuals up. So we see that that is not the only answer to it. The answer has to be a society, the fact that we have to give more resources to our young kids. We got to get more mentorships out there, and we got to be responsible gun ownership.
What programs do you guys have right now to try to reach that youth at such a young age? I know you guys do have the one where you guys go to school. I think CHAMPS program is one of them. We have our CHAMPS program. We do our Kids and Cops. We do our Youth Citizen Police Academy during the summer. You know, we also have Operation Giving Back program where we have identified people that based on your traits and your lifestyles and based on your history, that you're either going to be a victim or a perpetrator of a violent crime within 2 years in Richmond County. And we go identify these individuals and try to offer them resources prior to. If you're involved in gangs or work training that you need, we provide those services or try to get you aligned with those individuals. But that's just what we're doing here as the Sheriff's Office. Now, if we can do that as a law enforcement entity, think about what we can do as a society from a government standpoint or a societal standpoint to offer these resources. If this was duplicated 10 times or 100 times, think about the impact that we can make. So we talk about education, we talk about these programs that are going on. We had a high number of homicides last year. Over the last 8 years, it seemed like we're on that same trend for this year. Do you feel like that's not working, or do you feel like something needs to be changed here maybe?
Absolutely something has to be changed. Like I said, we're having homicides, but we're locking those individuals up. It's not like people are getting away with murder. We have a very high solvability rate in homicide. It's always been that way. So that's not the deterrence. Like I say, society, we got to do something prior to. Like I said, if you are a guardian of a 12, 13, or 14-year-old, you need to be responsible for where that person is at night and the group that he hangs out with. It is not acceptable for a 13-year-old or 14-year-old to be hanging out at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning or not coming in for 2 or 3 days. That's not acceptable. In society, if we allow that to happen, and we allow them to stand on the street corners, and we allow them to hang out with a group of individuals that we know have dropped out of school, who are not trying to invest in themselves, then bad things are going to happen. Eventually, they're going to happen. And so we have to take responsibility as guardians of our young people to curb that behavior.
It seems like, and I don't necessarily disagree with you when you say that, but it seems like the last two that we've had were not following that path where they had responsible parents. I mean, I know Buddy Brown was out at 1 in the morning getting food from a DoorDasher, but 15-year-old Zaire Person, who just passed away 13 days ago now, I mean, straight A student, athlete, parents were very involved. Unfortunate situation, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's always going to be outliers. I'm looking at it from a holistic standpoint, a big picture. I look at it as, 35 homicides, not the 2. Because, we're going to have the Anthony Arbery's, we're going to have the outlier in cases where innocent victims are unfortunately susceptible to bad people and gun violence. You're going to have those. But I'm talking about the majority of it. So I'm talking 90% of your homicides involve individuals where it possibly could have been prevented if their behavior had changed.
And when you first were trying to become sheriff, you ran on community policing. What does that mean to you?
Oh, absolutely. It's buying into the fact that the community and law enforcement, I said, are working together in the partnership. Unfortunately, sometimes we rely too much on law enforcement to be everything, and that becomes a little frustrating for y'all young deputies when we ask these deputies to be everything to everyone. We ask about what kind of mental health training we've had, how we know autism training that we've had, domestic violence abuse, sex trafficking abuse, opioid abuse, mental health issues. All these things we're asking law enforcement officers to be masters of. Whereas community, we should be partnering with individuals. So if we do come across these individuals and provide these services, we can divert them or we can refer them to our community partners. And that's what community policing is. Policing is the fact that we're working together. Now, we are the enforcement element of the society, and we are the keepers of the bad guys. But as far as the healing, the recovery, the substance addiction resources and stuff, that's not law enforcement, that is community. But we would like to partner so we get the homelessness problem. We should be able to, provide community partners that we can refer these people who are genuinely wanting help.
And do you feel like the community policing efforts since you've been in office have been working well, and that you guys have continued to do that?
Yeah, we've had success. Like I say, as far as if you look at it from a statistical standpoint, violent crime has reduced every year in Richmond County. We talk about violent crime as a whole. Now, unfortunately, the shootings and the homicides get all the attention. But your rapes, your robberies, your commercial robberies, your bank robberies, your business robberies, all those, your burglaries, all those have went down and continue to go down. So holistically, we are a safer community. It's just certain crimes get the headlines. But overall, violent crimes and property crime are down in Richmond County. And that's what we want people to understand too. But again, unfortunately, when you have a social media platform where people can just spout any opinion that they want about, this is happening every day, it's getting worse. And statistically, that's not true. Things are getting better every day in Richmond County for the last 10 years. But they wait. You have a certain group of individuals, naysayers, who wait for an opportunity when something bad happens and exploits it. It makes it seem like that is the narrative of our reality when it is not.
Well, the shootings are up too, right? Aggravated assaults with a weapon.
Yeah,
are
they're
up
up
as well. So we've seen more shootings too. Just
in
clear.
this year we got about 12 more than we had last year. Homicides are on pace. We got one less than we had last year. So we've had 12 more shootings this year than we had last year. So that's about a 12% increase from last year. But again, we're just 4 months in. So we look at it again holistically. You know, we wait to December to really see exactly what we've done. Just like with your homicides, you know, we can go a month and a half without having a homicide, and then next month you have 3, and then all of a sudden they say, you know, you got a homicide every day, and you went 45 days without a homicide. You know, so, and that's what we say, that people take advantage of the moment and look for some of the negatives, and we really wish people would pause a moment and kind of look at what we're doing right and what we can do better.
And I know you said your jail is full right now. You guys are putting people away. How's the relationship with the DA and getting the correct people locked up and keeping them locked up?
Well, you know, that goes outside our
Because that's a big conversation in the community. Full disclosure, I mean, you hear that every day, that people are out on the streets that they think shouldn't be because they've already committed a crime. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, unfortunately, like I say, that goes into somebody else's purview. Our job is to lock them up, hold them, and let the courts decide on that. So, you know, it's up to the court to decide what the punishment is. That's not my job as sheriff. Like I say, my jail is full. It's over capacity, actually. Now, again, unfortunately, COVID put a whole monkey wrench in our judicial system, whereas for incarcerating individuals, you know, that was a big problem with proximity and whatnot. So people had to go to alternative sentencing based on that. I think that caused us 2 years of some individuals who very well may have been incarcerated and should have been incarcerated, but because of the pandemic and the medical side of it, it was not feasible to do so. So yeah, did some of that happen? Absolutely. So we are still recovering from that. So you're going to have those individuals who very well should have been in jail and possibly wouldn't have been out committing these crimes, but you're going to have that. But I think we're recovering from that. Like I said, I have a good relationship with our judicial, with our district attorney's office. The judges and I speak all the time about trying to get our jails cleared and things. So we have that partnership. We have that. But then in the state of Georgia, too, the prison system is full in the state of Georgia. Because like I said, I keep them. I got people who have been sentenced, but the state of Georgia won't go get them because they don't have any place to put them. So that's just not a Richmond County problem. That is a state problem.
How frustrating is that for you?
It's frustrating to the fact that I'm trying to maintain peace and order within my jail. I am a constitutional officer who, by definition, are responsible for the safety and welfare of inmates. And also with that, the safety and welfare of my deputies. When my jail is overcrowded and inmates overcrowded, that makes an unsafe environment for the inmates and my deputies. So that's what concerns me because, again, I only have so much space, but people are still, I can't just let criminals go. If somebody go out and shoot somebody or commits a homicide or rape or robbery, they belong somewhere. They don't belong on the streets. So that becomes my dilemma and my conflict. So that's what frustrates me, to the fact that I don't, you know. And another thing that frustrates the fact that, you know, for the last 2 SPLOST packages, we have requested an expansion for our jail so we can have a place to put them. And unfortunately, those requests were denied. So we really have just run out of space, and that becomes frustrating because it becomes dangerous for us. And
talking about deputies, do you know how many you guys are short right now?
It's hard to say physical bodies because we're short in spots and positions. Like we got sergeant spots, but bodies, because you're talking about the road and the jail. So right now we're
I guess
shorter.
road patrol. How short are you guys?
I couldn't say. I can't break up the numbers. I do it as personnel. I can't.
Okay.
So I can't say how many on the road and how many in jail. Right now I know I'm shorter in my jail than I am in operations. Okay,
so you have, would you say you have enough people out there to be able to cover Richmond County and to do the job that you guys are wanting to do?
We have deputies. People come in and work overtime. The thing about it is not that, because everybody doesn't work 24/7. So we cover our shifts without incident. It's about giving people time off. If that, when people call in sick, people have time with their families. That's what is hard to do. That those gaps when you come up short. But as far as personnel, we're going to respond to a call. We haven't missed a call. We haven't not responded. Our response times have not slowed in any way. So we definitely have enough people to cover the calls. It's just the amount of work that they have to do because we don't have as many people as we would like to have.
For sure. Is there anything from a different county or area that you've seen them doing that you really like that you're trying to maybe implement here, just in terms of cutting down crime and stuff like that, or just programs to get out in the community?
No, when I go to sheriff's convention, I look at sheriffs from all over the state of Georgia and look at their programs and have relationships with them. And if we see a program that they're doing and we want to duplicate, then absolutely we will. So, we get together 3 or 4 times a year as sheriffs and we collaborate and we talk back and forth. So we're always looking for the next great thing. A lot of it, some of them is cost restricted because, again, we're the largest full-service sheriff office in the state of Georgia. Most sheriff's offices in Georgia have multiple PDs working within their jurisdiction. And we don't. So we do it all. Like I tell people, Columbia County answered about 86,000 calls for service. We average 423,000. So it just kind of give you an idea of our workload. So it's kind of hard to compare us to a lot of different counties because they have PDs within that take up a lot of the law enforcement standpoint, and the sheriff usually handle the courts and the jails mostly. So we kind of have a hybrid where I'm a sheriff and I'm a police chief. So it's kind of hard to find a program in Georgia that fits the model of the amount of people that we have and the kind of work that we have to do.
For sure. Is there anything new that you guys are working on or anything right now, new programs or anything like that you'd like us to know about?
No, what we're trying to do, one of the things that I've always said that we eventually want to have a countywide camera system. That is something I think technology is our biggest tool right now, especially when you're talking about workplace shortages. The camera doesn't sleep. It doesn't need time off. It works as far as memory-wise and technology-wise 100 times quicker than the human eye can do or you can stroke on the computer. So the technology standpoint is our biggest asset right now. So, we plan to complete our downtown project surveillance camera system this year, and then hopefully with success of that, that we get to expand it throughout the county. So that's going to make things a lot safer for us too.
That's separate from the flock cameras, correct?
That's correct. That's a whole separate system.
And are those the red light ones that you guys have to help you help road patrols or anything like that, or is that separate as well?
No, remember the red light cameras are not law enforcement cameras.
Correct. Yeah.
They're from traffic management standpoint. Now again, once we get into establishing a base for a camera system, we'll be able to tie into those existing camera systems and use them for law enforcement function, not for as enforcement, but for surveillance and spotting crimes, tags, and also, looking for vehicles and information like that. So that'll just be part of our complete package once we get there. Now we're years from that, a few years from that, but once we start this downtown project and see exactly the success rate it gives and show people that we're not out trying to monitor. It's not Big Brother, because anytime you're talking about technology and camera system, you get the naysayers and people write us a letter talking about Big Brother is watching and we want to be under surveillance. But technology is, when you say other people use, it's used all over the United States. That's what you use to catch crime. The first time it happened, people say, let's pull the cameras. When a major crime happens, it's been used to solve major crimes throughout this nation. So we're really behind the curve when it comes to technology. When everybody say, you get the naysayers about intrusion and people's rights. And, we're 15 years behind the curve when it comes to technology.
And do you have any questions or anything?
You don't say you had just a few quick questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that wasn't a few quick questions.
Since it's been, I think it was 10 years ago, the Boston bombing, those guys essentially got caught.
Because of surveillance,
yeah. For surveillance.
Mm-hmm. And so if something like that were to happen in this community, I think at the current state we're at now, it'd be really difficult to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Essentially, it shows the importance of these cameras. So, like, what is the goal right now to achieve adequate surveillance of our community? Like,
Well, the goal now in connection with the flock, showing the success that we've had with the flock, but that's a moment in time, capturing time. So that is a component that shows that different technology intertwined work extremely well. Now, the downtown camera system, first, again, that's our business district. So if we can get some successes downtown and show people and show businesses, make businesses even safer for surveillance or spotting nefarious individuals who may want to commit break-ins or break into cars, because a lot of thefts come from the cars and the businesses. You know, once we show that and show the technology that we have captured these individuals based on technology, and also when you look at it from the court standpoint, going in court with a videotape instead of a statement or a testimony from somebody is 10 times better as far as conviction rate. So, you know, we would encourage people to look at the big picture and not just look at it from one standpoint. And I think eventually we're going to get there. If we can get the funding and get the buy-in from our community and from our commissioners and see the importance of it, I think we'll get there.
A last question, just for anyone who's watching this tonight, obviously going back on the topic of shootings, homicides, for any parent or a young child or I guess teenager, if they just happen to be watching this, just what's your message to them about the recent violence and homicides, gun violence? Yeah,
my thing is the kids now we see, and again, especially in the minority African American community, feel that they have to carry a gun. And they don't realize that the moment you carry that gun, you're going to be put yourself in a position where you have to use it. Because I really don't think, you know, a 12 or 13-year-old, 15-year-old dreams about going out and committing homicide or shooting somebody. Now, you got some bad elements out there, some bad seed. But they're carrying this gun, and they think it empowers them. But all it does is put you in a position that you're going to be forced to use it. Because if you're carrying a gun and a situation escalates and you pull it out, somebody else pulls out one, it's a decision has to be made. And very well, you may lose your life. And like I said, we've had several shootings and homicides where everybody had a gun. So it doesn't make you any safer. If anything, it makes the situation more dangerous because you're going to put in a situation where you may be forced to use it and you may end up losing your life because of it, where you could have just walked away. Sorry, just a quick follow-up. What can parents tell their kids? How can parents talk to their children about this? The parents have to be... I know you, like, I'm telling you to wear different hats. Parents have to be parents. Parents need to understand everything that those kids are bringing into their home. When those kids, none of these kids are sleeping on the street. They're not homeless kids. These people who are hanging in gangs, who are shooting up these houses, who are shooting at each other at parties, they're not sleeping on the street. They're sleeping in a home. That means that gun is in that home. So that parent or that guardian needs to know what that person or what that child is bringing into their home. And it's about just being a parent, being a responsible parent. And that's why I say when these shootings happen and kid takes another kid's life, you know, some of that responsibility, and you've seen they prosecuted in other cases, falls on the parent for allowing that gun to be possessed illegally by that juvenile. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on that. We don't put enough light on that. Again, we get outraged too much at the wrong things.
So there you go, Sheriff Richard Roundtree sitting down one-on-one with our Will Rio, talking about this rise that we're seeing in violence, especially among our youth here in Richmond County. If you missed any of that conversation that Will and I had, I believe it'll be up on our YouTube channel. Let me just double check that before I give you some bad information. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. If we go in here. Yeah, so it looks like if you just go to our YouTube channel and you go to our videos, that conversation Will and I had should be right up there for that. Sorry, I'm just looking through, making sure that all the lives do go up there. Not 100% sure if they do, but I think they do. If not, we'll get it up there. We'll get this conversation up there for you to check out. But Will and Sheriff Roundtree talking about the rising crime and some cases that we've got here. 13-year-old Buddy Brown, 15-year-old Zaire Person recently killed They're still not releasing a whole lot of information on that just yet, so we'll have to wait and see what comes out of those cases. There is another case I wanted to talk about, unrelated but still happening right now, and that is the Eddie Cruey case. Now, if you don't remember, Cruey was killed a few years ago, allegedly killed by his wife. She's been charged with his murder, and she has been on trial the last couple days. The state laid out its case yesterday, the defense laying out its case today. Our Hallie Turner is there, and I'll let her bring us up to speed, and then we'll kind of take a little trip back in time and talk a little bit more about this. So here's what Hallie did yesterday when she was at the courthouse.
Well, Laura, the state's efforts are to show Sandra and Eddie were married just like any other couple, but they had their share of disagreements. Eddie stayed in contact with his family even though they do live in Virginia, and they talked 3 to 5 times a week and expected to hear from him during the holidays. But when they didn't hear from him for Thanksgiving in 2019 and into the weeks after, the state says they got worried and came down here to Augusta in December, only to hear that Sandra didn't know where Eddie was and that he left with money, clothes, a sleeping bag, and didn't come back. Eddie's father, Jerry, was the first to take the stand, stating the last time he saw or heard from his son was November 19th of 2019, when Eddie called to thank him for birthday money. Sandra told Jerry she had just received her first Social Security check, and then the phone went dead. Moments later, a text came in from Sandra saying she and Eddie would call back, but they never did. The next time they spoke to her was when they came down in December, and Sandra didn't seem fazed about Eddie's disappearance. Her story was still that he was missing, and he left to go see friends, but Jerry says it didn't add up.
No, because we talked several times a week, and he always told me his plans.
Next, it was James Whittington, who grew up with the couple and has been a close friend for decades. James says he did hear them argue occasionally, but says he never saw it become physical. He thought Eddie was missing and never saw it coming when Sandra confessed to him.
She looked at me and said, "I killed Eddie."
What was your response to that?
Well, I had no words at the moment. I was shocked.
James says he knew he had to contact law enforcement, leading to the next witness, the GBI medical examiner who performed Eddie's autopsy. The state showed the jury photos of Eddie's body. Sandra Dales glanced up to acknowledge the images, but never showed emotion as they went over the 7 lacerations to his head, multiple skull and rib fractures. After lunch, investigator Sylvester took the stand, followed by a crime scene expert who told the jury a soil probe led them to the body. They put it in the ground to test the soil to see if it was disturbed or not, and when they pulled the stick back up, substances that were not soil were on the bottom.
Is the bottom of the soil sample that we collected. It actually has some unknown white creamy substance and some hair attached to it.
That's when they found Eddie Cruey buried in a 3-foot, 9-inch deep hole in his own yard. The state rested their case just before 3 this afternoon, and when asked when they would be taking the stand tomorrow, Dales told Judge Stone that she needed time to decide. She has until 9 tomorrow morning, when the court is back in session, to decide if she's going to testify or if she won't. And if she does decide to testify, she will be questioned by the defense and cross-examined by the state. But the defense starts with their case in the morning, and we'll keep you posted.
So that's where we stand now, but let's go ahead and back up a little bit here. I'm looking at a story from January 7th of 2020 that we did on this case. So that was when we actually went to the house of Eddie Cruey, and his wife just happened to be in the driveway at the time. We got in a couple quick questions with her, so that was the only time I believe that we've heard from Sandra Dales in this case. There was talk of whether she was going to take the stand. Last I heard, she hadn't taken the stand. I'm double checking real quick to see if that's changed. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Okay, so she has not taken the stand yet. We're still on the defense's witness. We don't know if she's going to take the stand yet. Yeah, we don't know if she's going to take the stand yet. We were supposed to know by 9 o'clock this morning, but hasn't figured that out yet. But anyway, let's go back to 2020. And when we heard from Eddie Cruey's wife, I'm going to go ahead and play the story from about 3 years ago now and kind of show you about what was going on then and kind of what led up to how we got here now.
Do you know where your husband is? No, I do not. Why did you wait to report it?
Because I thought if he went to his family. That's what Eddie Cruey's wife Sandra told us before going back inside her house, with missing person signs posted just outside. The last time his stepmom heard from him was November 19th.
His dad and his family and friends know that this is not usual for Eddie to be not in touch with anyone for this amount of time.
His wife disagrees. It's a tricky history. In July, deputies arrested Sandra. They say she hit her husband in the head with a hammer. And the report describes her saying they'd both be sleeping with a knife and that Eddie hit her with a towel and threatened to kill the dogs. Family friend Lisa Sistar Harkin says he didn't want to press charges.
There have been accusations on both sides about domestic abuse. I've never physically seen any on her. I have seen some on him.
Neighbors say the couple drank a lot and they heard screaming from the house. Family and friends say Sandra has stopped talking to them since Christmas.
And then there's been some inconsistency in her stories. She told the family one thing, told the investigator something else.
Sandra did tell them Eddie left on foot with a sleeping bag and $200. His family fears the worst.
We don't feel like that Eddie's, we don't feel like Eddie's alive.
So there you go. Again, that story from all the way back in January of 2020. And at that time, I guess they hadn't found Eddie's body yet. Obviously, now we know he was found buried in the backyard there, and now Sandra's been charged with his murder. So we'll have to see what comes out of that, but kind of giving you a little bit of a look in the vault there, showing you how we got to the point that we're at now. We've got about 15 minutes or so here, so we'll go ahead and kind of put a bow on this for today as we get ready for our midday newscast. If you want to head on over to the TV side of things, Zana and Tim will have all the latest news and weather for you over there on News 12. That's it for the News 12 Now desk for today. I'm off tomorrow, so hopefully you guys have a happy, safe, and healthy weekend, and I will see you back here on Monday for some more top headlines. Have a good one.